Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Deborah Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light.
Well, in just a minute, our special Morning Light panel will go behind the headlines.
But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. New Year's resolutions often don't last. So why do we make them? Why do they fail? And how can we actually keep them? Well, we are talking to Morning Light medical contributors, Dr. David White and Dr. Richard Rayner, to find out in our Body and Soul segment.
Get out your notebooks. This will be a helpful show today. Well, there was JFK's New Frontier, LBJ's Great Society, Reagan's Revolution, and now what President Donald Trump, in the first day of a string of Inauguration Day speeches, calls the Golden Age of America. The new president's wide-ranging speeches included a promise to plant the Stars and Stripes on Mars, rename the Gulf of Mexico, an aggressive plan to end illegal immigration, stop diversity programs in the military, and a promise to make Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream come true. But how should evangelical Christians and Catholics, those who are kind of essential to the Trump coalition, be thinking through and praying about these proposals in the days ahead?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. You have to pray about it. And ultimately, we know that God is in control.
Pray for discernment, and we hold each other accountable.
That is right. Well, it was a scene once thought unthinkable between two rivals. Tea at the White House, a ride together to the Capitol. Warm words and hugs between the Bidens and the Trumps. And after the inauguration in the Capitol Rotunda, the incoming president and First Lady accompanied the outgoing president to a waiting Marine helicopter. The peaceful transfer of power occurred without incident. So what can we learn from this? And what can divided neighborhoods learn from this moment to create space and respect for each other?
That's a great question. I think a lot of us think, look, as basic, something as simple and as human as having tea or coffee with someone really changes the whole conversation.
And it really does.
Yeah. Well, a new Pew Research study gives us a new window into the epidemic of American loneliness. 16% of Americans say they're lonely all the time. 38% they say they sometimes feel lonely, and 74% rely on a spouse for help, followed by mom, a trusted friend, and mental health professionals. What can neighbors, specifically Christian neighbors, do to challenge this epidemic of American loneliness? We'll take these questions to the Morning Light panel this morning. And we're delighted to have a new face, not new to this program, because we had a wonderful conversation with you, Paul Schemel, about the Gettysburg Address a while back, and our viewers can see that on the app on Lighthouse TV. Megan Martin, glad to have you back.
Good morning. Happy to be here. What
an exciting week this has been. And former Speaker of the House, Bryan Cutler, glad to have you. Your portrait getting unveiled next week?
Next week.
Next week. We'll be packing the galleries to see it. Is it a good one? Have you seen it?
I think so, yes.
It's a good likeness. It looks like you. Well, we've got headlines today that are pretty dramatic. The first one from the New York Post, the Golden Age. That's an audacious way, I think, for any president to begin. The new Trump era begins, which is kind of a little more logical. That's in the USA Today. Our friends at the Philadelphia Inquirer focused on one phrase that the president used, which was Liberation Day. Liberation Day. And there were some seated folks at that moment, I noticed, and some giving a standing ovation during that part of the speech. And then the Wall Street Journal kind of captures it, a defiant Trump. And I think you heard that defiance as the day increased. Many people in the audience for both all of the events yesterday self-identify as Christians. There were certainly Christian prayers, hymns, other elements of the pageantry that were dedicated to Christians. But there is a role that Christians play, I think, in this process, which is holding leaders accountable, no matter who they are. Paul, let me begin with you. Looking at the agenda, looking at this flurry of activity, what would you say to your neighbors who self-identify as Christians and say, all right, maybe excited, gleeful, a lot of joy, but look closely at these details. Here's where you need to pay attention.
So, Jeff, we should always be skeptical of any of our public officials, whether we like them or not. If you were skeptical of Joe Biden, you should be skeptical of Donald Trump, because these are political leaders, and we need to make sure that they're held accountable and held to the standards that we would expect for our leaders to be. So what we heard from the speech yesterday from the president is a lot of the initiatives that he talked about during his campaign. Now those things will come to pass. We need to look at a means ends. So we know what the ends are. For example, with immigration, he's talked a lot about deportations and things like that. We need to look as Christians at the means in which those things are executed.
How it happens.
That's right. We need to ensure that people are treated with dignity, regardless of how they're here and so forth. That goes with all of the other policies the new president will implement.
Megan, how have you been thinking about this? Thinking long term, how we hold a president accountable?
Sure. Well, I've been thinking that we as Americans need to pray not only for President Trump, if we voted for him, but for all the other elected officials for whom we did not vote. Because campaigning is one thing and governing is another. And now it's time to govern. And we need to pray that our leaders, all of them, are humble servants, that they are true to their beliefs, and they are true to improving the lives of the people of America.
But in some ways, you're putting the flags and the hats and the buttons and the stickers away because you're moving into this period, right?
I think the Bible is very clear that we're to pray for our leaders and God appoints them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also the same standards that we should use, as Paul pointed out. The Bible is also very clear on how we should govern and how we should treat one another. And that's the standards that I think we can all be hopeful for, because I think that will ultimately be what brings reconciliation.
And I know, look, when you're watching these programs, you can't always control what speakers say from the podium. But in watching some of the programming over the weekend, there was a lot of profanity alongside some beautiful moments. And you go, wait a second, you have to be able to at least speak out and hold people accountable. Let's talk about the way that the day kind of proceeded with the Bidens and the Trumps. There was a grace and a hospitality we didn't see 4 years ago that returned. Good thing. These are traditions that you hold in the House, different ways of saying goodbye to the defeated and the incoming. What do you think the importance and significance of it, and what can we learn from this kind of civility?
Well, I think, first of all, it was a return to normalcy, which is what we needed. I also think it shows an element of grace, which is important in our culture. As Megan pointed out, campaigning is very different than governing, and now it's time to govern. We have a country with a lot of problems, and it needs a lot of prayer, and it's going to need a lot of work. And I think that yesterday was a great first step.
Megan?
I completely agree, and civility is living out the golden rule and doing unto others as you would like done to yourself. And they set an example now for all of us to follow and for them to continue to follow to help heal our country.
Paul, I'll play devil's advocate here. People might say, but they don't deserve it. They ruined this country, or they didn't love the country as much as we do. And I hear that whenever there is a new president. Kind of, there was the beauty and the pageantry of what was happening at the Capitol, and then you had some booing and jeers in the arena. So you have a contrast here between civility and normal and some people who weren't behaving that way.
Yeah, our elected leaders should be the example. And I think that outgoing President Biden showed a good example of being civil. Incoming President Trump, and meeting with the Bidens in advance and so forth, did as well. That it was reciprocated. So that's what we should expect from our elected officials. That's what we as Christians should expect from our neighbors, from those that we have in our church and elsewhere.
Beautiful. Final question refers to a reason I think many people are involved in politics, because they're finding community, identity in politics, not often sometimes in churches. People are leaving the Moose Lodge, the Elks Lodge, the VFW, the American Legion, all these things people used to join. People aren't joining as much. They're not bowling together anymore and finding it in politics. Neighbors that you know and I know are lonely. They are not being checked on the way that we used to. What do we do as communities to reconstitute that? We're at a brand new era, an inflection point in our culture. There's a real possibility of leaving a lot of people behind, Paul.
Yeah, Jeff, you alluded to it in your comment on bowling. There's a good book on this, Bowling Alone, which you're probably familiar with. That really details what's happening in society. Mother Teresa, when she visited the United States in the early 1980s, said, "I've never seen poverty like I've seen in the United States." And it wasn't for lack of want of things. It was for lack of want of just the comforts of human contact. So that's with us still today. I think it's even worse. We as Christians we really have an obligation to reach out, not just to those in our church, but to those who are our neighbors, to those we see in our streets, those at work, those that we may not otherwise have political things in common with or religious things in common with. We have the dignity that God gives to all of us as equal children of God, and that's our responsibility. Thankfully, Jeff, that's something we can all do in our own lives.
How do you not drive by? I I mean, how do you get, when you get to the stoplight and someone is looking and they're motioning and you go, that's a scam, or this is how do you engage and see their humanity in that particular moment at the stoplight?
Yeah, so one time I was talking to someone and they said, well, if you give money to a panhandler, they're just going to use it for something bad, which may well be true. And the response I heard was, well, that's on them. On me is what I do as a Christian. And whether that's giving them something that may or may not be a good idea, but at least acknowledging their humanity, acknowledging the dignity of the person that they are, acknowledging that they're there. Sometimes that might be the greatest gift they get all day.
If someone asks you for a, right?
Yeah, the people we see at the street corner, exactly.
Yeah, Megan, your thoughts on how we kind of, in this moment where the tension, you can cut the tension with a knife. Nationally, we know neighborhoods are divided. Yesterday, half the country cheering, the other half, not so much. How do you reach out to people who are feeling lonely and isolated today and think their identity is lost?
Sure, it starts with each and every one of us. And I can give you a great example. Our son works at a grocery store when he's home from college, and he did it in the summers. And he has shared with us how many senior citizens shop alone at night. And he helps take their groceries out to their car. And sometimes they'll say, we just stand here and talk to me for a little bit. And he is such a kind-hearted young man, very devout, and he is kind and empathetic. And I think we need to extend that kind of grace and kindness and empathy to those around us, one person at a time. His name is Ted Martin, and he is our youngest. And I couldn't be more proud of the fine young man that he is and the character that he exhibits on a daily basis.
Bryan, you get the final word today on how we kind of reconnect community outside of politics, outside of our leaders telling us to be nice to one another. How do we do this with people practically who live next door but are living alone?
Well, I think we start by getting out from behind the keyboard in our phones. The irony for me is we have all these social media programs that are supposed to better connect us, and yet we've never felt more lonely. We've never had this record low number of people talk about a relationship with the Lord. And I think that it really comes back to us, as Paul outlined. We're called to minister to our friends, our neighbors. I've seen many churches doing community meals and just times of fellowship. And it's less about the actual meal. It's more about the face-to-face time and the interaction. And I think that
just open the door.
Right, just open the door, say hello, talk to your neighbor, introduce yourself when someone new comes into church. I'm sure we're all guilty of it. You sit in the same pew every Sunday, and that's where you go. And the truth is there's literally dozens of people in church that you could make that first step towards.
Very helpful today. Great conversation. Thank you all very, very much. Well, many people resolve to get healthier at the start of a new year, but what happens when the energy and excitement wears off and those goals don't come to fruition? Our Morning Light medical contributors are right here to discuss how we can get back on track with no guilt. You're watching Morning Light on Lighthouse TV.
A 2024 Forbes Health One poll surveyed 1,000 adults about making New Year's resolutions. Researchers found most adults plan to prioritize fitness. 49% will use a fitness app to help them stick to their goals, while 43% will join a gym. 29% of those polled say their resolution will have a positive impact for 1 to 2 years. 57% say 3 or more years. So what is the secret to keeping resolutions? With so many Americans wanting to live a healthier lifestyle, why is it so hard to achieve our goals? Joining me are Morning Light medical contributors Dr. David White and Dr. Richard Rayner of Aspire Health Concepts. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
So as health professionals, I'm sure you hear lots of New Year's resolutions. What are the top 3?
Well, typically we, hear people, I want to lose weight, I want to exercise more, and maybe have some more time for myself. Those are the big ones.
And so how do they start off with these resolutions, and then what happens?
Yeah, well, it varies from person to person, but usually they kind of pick some sort of goal, and then they say, okay, I'm going to start on January 1st, and we're going to jump in, and we're going to do this thing, and we're going to get it done and do it just right.
And it does. It seems like everyone's energized. I mean, those sound like my New Year's resolutions, things that I want to keep. How do we stop? I mean, what happens? What's the breakdown?
Well, I think we realize that it hurts. And, we grow up learning that pain is a signal to stop. Pain is a great tutor. Hey, you shouldn't be doing this. This is dangerous. And I think when we are pursuing kind of that better version of ourselves, we want to improve, we want to experience more, all of a sudden we realize that we're uncomfortable. And that's two reasons. That number one, growing and getting healthier requires us to say no to natural cravings. It's not that we can't partake in good things, but our tendency is to indulge in something if it feels good or tastes good or it's a good experience. So we have to say no. And anytime you say no to that craving, it's uncomfortable. The other piece is overcoming inertia. Inertia means a body at rest stays at rest. And it's uncomfortable to go from still to movement. So that might be, it's uncomfortable to get out of bed instead of hitting the alarm. It's uncomfortable to turn the screens off and pick up a book. It's uncomfortable, the exertion of exercise. It's uncomfortable. But I think what is learned is we can separate that discomfort from negative pain to something that is an expression, a delightful expression of growth and learning.
So how do we get over this? How do we break these barriers?
Yeah, I think one way is to just have some reasonable goals to start, not start too high and then not start at the end, but think what is reasonable, what's good, and then take incremental steps. So if you said, I want to, run or walk or whatever, buy the shoes and then put them by the door. And, if it's really something that's hard, but have reasonable goals and then start small and work up.
How can we, so we need to get motivated, but how can we work our faith into this? How can we pray about this? Because these New Year's resolutions, some of them are very good. I mean, getting fit, eating the right food, staying healthy. How can we really pray about this?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that we should never pray about. So that would be one thing is to, ask God to give you not only the motivation, but the wisdom. What is worthwhile? What is the best thing that I should do with my time, my energy, my resources? And then pursue that. And maybe instead of a particular number on a scale or a number of miles or whatever, more principles. I want to go from where I am and just keep moving the dial this way.
So little steps at a time.
Absolutely.
Don't set your goals so high initially.
Yeah, I think it's okay to have aspirations. You can have a goal set down the road, and I think it's Jefferson that's credited with saying, like, if you want something you've never had, you're going to have to be willing to do something you've never done. And that doesn't mean you take the huge step, but I often encourage my patients who say, I don't have time for exercise. We all have 10 minutes a day that we can devote to something. And so I encourage people to get their spouse, their friend, their dog by themselves with music or a podcast and walk 10 minutes. 10 minutes a day, 3 days a week. That's where you start. And I think the old adage of action breeds motivation really does come to fruition.
Okay, we do need to take a break. We want to talk more about this because this is such a very important topic. Coming up next on Morning Light, the doctors will share some tips on how you can stay active and build motivation by taking small steps each day. We are back in 1 minute. Welcome back. In our last segment, we talked about why people break their New Year's resolutions so quickly. So what steps can we take to be successful when it comes to fitness? Back with us, Dr. David White and Dr. Richard Rayner. Thank you both for staying with us. So we're talking about exercise. We're talking about the New Year's resolutions, and exercise is usually top of the list to stay fit, eat healthy, lose weight. This is really a mindset. We have to change our way of thinking, and that can be tough.
Yeah, and I think it's really, you have to face the truth that we always do what we most want to do. You often hear people, they'll eat a cookie or a piece of cake and say, oh, why did I eat that? And their answer is because you wanted to. And it was delicious and it was lovely. So you do what you want to do. So I encourage people, hey, really take time to consider what it is that you love. What do you really delight in? What brings you joy? And I have things in my life that I just truly love to do, things I love to do when I need time alone, things I delight in doing with my wife, things I really hope to be able to do with my children and, God willing, grandchildren down the road. So I have to train for that. I have to prepare for that. I have to do the work because those are the things I most want to do. So I have to be willing to address those, like we said, step by step by step.
Yeah, certainly self-discipline. I know I had a slice of peanut butter cake yesterday and I'm like, why am I eating this? This is not good. I should save this for, say, once a week. That's really the way to go. And I love what you said, that you need to get motivated, and taking those small steps by, say, walking 10 minutes a day. What are some other things that you can do?
I will often tell my patients, if there's one word that you remember from our discussion about this kind of thing, is scheduling. If you don't schedule it, if it's not, I know guys that have played basketball twice a week for the last 40 years. It's just part of their DNA. It's what they do. But for the rest of us, we have to plan it, right? So once a week, sit down and say, okay, can't do it here because I have, so many meetings, but I can do this day, and this day, even if it's 10 minutes, like David said, and just start. Do that, and don't let anybody, kick that off of your schedule unless it's, of course, an emergency.
Yeah, I love that. Just adding it to your calendar and saying, this is what I'm going to do. And it's also helpful when you have other people doing it with you.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we have long discovered that inspiration is most consistently found and sustained in community. When you surround yourself with people that are really pursuing the best version of themselves, and that can be true in church, people who are pursuing godliness and love and kindness, or fitness, wellness, or education, whatever it is. When you surround yourself with a community of people who are in that pursuit, willing to feel and experience discomfort together, that is where true inspiration is found, because often that discomfort when pursuing things solo is experienced or translated as suffering, whereas in community it's experienced as relationship, as inspiration, as joy.
And while we're doing this, we also need to keep our faith motivated. That's what's going to motivate us as well, knowing that this is really what God wants, the best for us.
Yeah, as we have talked at other times, I think really the issue is stewardship, right? We've each been given certain genetics and certain communities and certain families, and are we using that in the best way that we can? And knowing that God's grace covers it all, no matter how well or how, let's say, poorly we do that. But yeah, kind of saying that, look, I've been given this, what should I do with it in the number of years I have here?
Yeah, certainly, that is wonderful advice. And what advice, though, can you give to people who say, I tried, and you know what, I broke my resolution, like I did with my peanut butter cake yesterday. So, what motivation can you give people who say, like, I failed, I'm done, I can't do this?
Just say, yes, of course you did. Yeah, and it's really encouraging people to have grace for themselves. We desire grace for ourselves, from others, and us towards others. It really has to do about grace. I mean, we as Christians know about grace, and that should be expressed and embraced as it pertains to how we behave in any way. But especially too, as we pursue wellness, have grace for ourselves, have grace for each other.
And we must remember that God's mercies are new every morning, right? So in a sense, every day is New Year's Day, right? We've kind of have this calendar that in the Western world starts on January 1st and that. But really, actually God's mercies are new every moment of the day. So we could decide right at this moment, right now, I'm going to make a switch. I'm going to do it a little bit better, and then just move ahead humbly and joyfully.
So very well said, and that is really wonderful advice from both of you. Thank you so much for being here today and sort of getting us in the right mindset.
Thanks for having us.
And stay with us. We're back right after the break. Welcome back. Coming up tomorrow on Morning Light, we will continue our Body and Soul segment, focusing on the importance of movement. The owner of Visionary Training Systems will be here to explain why just small bursts of movement can help you achieve your fitness goals. Plus, you will also hear from someone who has been helped in their journey. And that's a look at what's coming up tomorrow on Morning Light. Now, Jeff, your closing thoughts.
Thank you, Deborah. Well, you've heard the story about the Philadelphia socialite Elizabeth Powell, who asked Benjamin Franklin a question on the last day of the Constitutional Convention back in 1787. Mrs. Powell asked, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" Franklin replies, "A republic if you can keep it." Whether you're celebrating or mourning today, it's not really about who's in the Oval Office, is it? As a citizen in a republic, you're a voting board member, think about it, of an almost 250-year-old experiment in self-government. We're in charge, you and me. It's our character, not just the president's, that charts the course of our history. The founders knew that if those citizens weren't guided by eternal principles, the permanent, unchangeable principles, it would be game over for the American experiment. If we couldn't decide between good and evil, if we couldn't determine what was right and wrong, we'd be a footnote, a byline in history. No, we can't keep the republic without humility and reliance on God. That's a prayer for this new president and, by God's grace, the ones to follow. For Deborah and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for watching. Check on your neighbors. We'll see you again tomorrow morning.